Today is Sunday, October the 11th, 2020. My name is Maggie Rivas Rodriguez. I'm interviewing John Steve Alvarado for the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Mr. Alvarado, that this interview is going to be placed at the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at UT Austin. So if there's anything you don't want to answer, feel free to say you don't want to answer it. Or if there's something that you really want to talk about that I'm not asking you about, feel free to also bring that up. Because we're not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting to a few things. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions. And if you could, after the questions, either say, yes, I agree, or no, I don't agree. Okay. Voces wants to archive your interview along with any photographs at the Benson Library. Do you consent to that?
Yes, I do.
Do you grant Voces copyright over this interview and any material that you provide?
Yeah, what's that going to entail? Is that entail, will that affect anything? If I decide to publish something that's a personal work, would that affect anything on anything I decide to publish?
No, we don't have exclusive copyright, but what it will do is that if we want to use your photograph, say in a book or a journal article or something, we'll be able to do that without having to go to you and get you to sign off on the copyright.
Okay. Yeah, I agree to that.
Okay. Do you agree to allow us to post this interview on the internet where it might be viewed by people around the world?
I agree.
Okay.
I agree with that.
So we've already answered a bunch of questions in the pre-interview form. And you know that some of those questions are going to be used for our research. The whole form is kept in a secure Voces server. But before we send it to the Benson, we will strip, if you decide that you want to put into your public file, we would take out any personal information, emails, phone numbers of anybody. So that wouldn't be part of your public file. But do you want your that information that you gave us in the pre-interview form, we can print out and we can put it in the public file. Are you okay with that?
That's fine.
Okay. And I know this was the answer to this one, but sometimes we get requests from journalists who want to want to contact our interview subjects. And we're in a journalism department, so we're pretty good about only dealing with legitimate news sources. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your email with journalists?
I agree.
Okay, great. So again, thank you so much for agreeing to this interview. We're going to start off, and I don't know if you have any time constraints, because I want to make sure that we get to all the questions that I want. But if there's something, if you're going to have a cutoff at a certain hour, let me know that so that I can make sure that we get our key questions in.
Okay, and I'll let you know. My daughter's about to leave, go back to school for the weekend. She was here for the weekend, so I'll just need to say goodbye to her.
Okay.
Make sure she finished packing and all that, but it'll take me a couple of minutes to do that.
Okay, we can pause and then we can continue then. So I want to start a little bit with you growing up in South Texas, in really kind of in a relatively, you know, you haven't gone too far from home, have you?
No. They used to make fun of me saying that I had older cousins that I'd never leave anywhere past Highway 90. And when I went to do my undergrad in Seguin, it was right off of Highway 90, but it was 90 going east. So I never, no, it was, not to say I was a mama's boy, but I was close to my dad as much as my mom. But I guess we really all were. My oldest brother's the one who left out of state, but it wasn't until later in his career. All of my brothers are electricians, and I'm the only one that went into education. A couple of them are union, one is not, but we're all very close to my mom and dad, and we never strayed far away. My youngest brothers are, one's in Lacoste, two houses from my mom, and the other one is in Castroville, 5 miles away. So yeah, we stayed pretty close. All of us did.
To what do you attribute that? Why are you all so close, do you think?
I think it had to do with the upbringing of our a very much a Latino Hispanic culture, brought up in the church, understanding the values that we were taught, that family was important right after your church and worshiping God. And You know, we live, we're modeled the faith of how to live and really ultimately, you know, how to die. We were together with our grandparents. We were blessed to see our grandparents go and saw the process of life that happens uh, with a lot of love in our family, a lot of time to get together. And it was tough because my mom had 4 boys and no daughters, so she was always needing help with tamales, with everything else that she never got. She never got that until, you know, my younger brother, we'll say Ignacio, we call him Billy. Uh, his wife is the one that's been kind of the mainstay. Uh, but we were all very close. I attribute it to just the closeness that we had in our home growing up in our family. The obligations you felt to take care of people that took care of you when you were young, and not looking at it as a burden, but as a means to continue life and loving each other.
So you mentioned your grandparents. So was it both sets of grandparents? You lived close to them?
Yeah, we did. My grandmother, my maternal grandparents, of course, lived in Lozoya, but my mother got married to my dad in '67, and she took care of my paternal grandparents until they passed. They're in Lacoste, where we grew up.
Oh, that is a blessing for sure.
It is.
So one thing that that's interesting to me is you ended up going to Texas Lutheran College or University
Yeah.
now,
Yes, ma'am.
but you were brought up in the Catholic Church. Why
Yes,
Texas Lutheran?
there was 2 Catholic parochial schools, private schools that I wanted to go play at. I played baseball from the time I was 8 years old. My father had a big influence on me in playing baseball, and you know, I through the process of going through the Benito Valley High School and that system, we were very successful in baseball. And so all the teams around the area we played, I got to know all those players, and it seems like a lot of the area players went to these closer schools. So the 2 Catholic schools I wanted to go to, St. Mary's and Incarnate Word, had filled uh, the position that I played with players, one from Poteet and one from Pleasanton, that were one 2 years older and one 1 year older. So the only place I had where I could stay close to my home was in Seguin, a Lutheran school. It was a liberal arts school. I got my liberal arts degree there, went into education. But yeah, that was a change, and I thought I was doing wrong by going in the chapel at a Lutheran university. I only went twice, and I regretted it because I had so many friends that were Lutheran and that I got to know, but being a you know, Hispanic going into a private parochial school, most of the students that I went to school with were well off. Um, they didn't pay as many loans as I had to, or you know, that was another tribute to my father and my mother for being able to pay for that. My education in a private parochial school was so much more of a financial burden than it was for me to go to a public school, and it was really difficult. So I got the maximum baseball scholarship you could get, but it wasn't even half of what it would cost. But that was the reason I ended up at a Lutheran school and being raised Catholic. And there was a few of us there, and we'd look at each other like, can we go to chapel and can we go do this? And it was all so much the same, but there was just really a couple of very only a few very fundamental differences in the church that I learned. And of course, we studied every religion there when I was there. That was part of our graduation plan, and learned so much about the different faiths. We're studying even the ones that are in the world today, Nation of Islam, the Buddhist religion, and just got to really study every one of them and understand what different faiths are like, just the fundamentals of it.
You know, the screen is wiggling a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry, shaking this table when I move. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. So, what position did you play?
I was a catcher.
Very
I was a
good.
catcher since I was 10 years old. Uh, my dad, he helped me through that, and my brothers, and we all played. My father played. Um, the, you, the notice I wrote for the funeral home to announce to the public talked about his love for baseball, his love for sports, and the things that he loved. And I played from the time I was 8 years old, and I'm still playing in a 35 and over league, and I'm 49. He was there at the end. He was telling us, you don't need to play because you're going to get hurt. You got 4 kids you're raising, and he gave me such a hard time about it. But after every game, like even when I was in high school and college, and I'd either call him or stop by and see him on the way from the leagues I'd play in to let him know how I did, and very close, very loving relationship I had with him. That he loved sports, he loved baseball, he loved people that played hard and played with humility and played with their heart. Him and my mother, when I was at Texas Lutheran, I played approximately 200 games, 50 games a season. And they probably went to 85% of my out-of-town games, not just in Seguin. They went to UT 3 years. They went to Baylor. My father sometimes would take off for work and go himself. He had just bought an 85 Buick Regal, and he'd ride up to San Marcos, see me in Southwest Texas. He went to Houston Baptist one year, all the schools that we'd go play. So he got to see, I've tried to calculate it. He probably saw 85% of our games out of those 200.
Wow. So you had to take out loans to go to college?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I left there. I left Texas Lutheran, and the last week before graduation, they handed me a big old bill. But then the student loans started coming in after a grace period. And at that time, I was working with HB Zach. I remember I got my notice that my grace period for parent and student loans was over, making $10 an hour, and I wasn't ready to start teaching or coaching at the time. And finally, when I worked construction, I was working there in South Austin, right there on 290 West, right there on Ben White Boulevard. We built those bridges there, and I learned so much. Like I told you yesterday, I became part of the instrument man for a bridge crew, and they sent us to different parts of the state. South of Houston, we built the Intercoastal Bridge on Surfside Beach, but a lot of different places where I worked when there was special, not only conventional bridges, but other special bridges that were being built. After those year and a half, the summers I could handle. And my dad told me, he said, you're going to be able to work as long as you want, but you're going to understand that the winters and the summers are going to get a little harder to handle. So he kind of let me take the time I needed before I went into my field that I went to school for. He was very patient with me. But I remember one very specific time, after my first year at Texas Lutheran, I came home, and I was done in April, of course, the end of April. And I came home, and I was very discouraged because, I was a late bloomer physically, and I had a difficult first season. A lot of things I wasn't prepared for to go to my first year of undergrad. I couldn't even work a word processor. I do all my papers with the typewriter. But then the sports, the actual playing was difficult for me because it was just a different level, and I couldn't adjust. And I told my dad, and I convinced myself that he'd agree for me to stay home after that first year and just work, and I could go to one of the community colleges and just help out financially with him around the house. And he put his foot down. He said, no, you're going back. He said, you're going to continue working. You're going to be okay. He said, it's going to be always very encouraging. Well, I kind of dug in a little bit, and he just told me, I'm not going to discuss it with you. And he made me go back and finish at Texas Lutheran and finish my undergrad there with that bachelor's degree I got there. But I was very close to saying, that's enough. But he knew so much more from that aspect. I think if he would have had the opportunity to be a college student, he would have been really good at it. He would have loved it. He just, out of necessity, he had to take care of his parents, and would have been an awesome student. I think in so many different subjects he could have chosen. He loved working with people. He had an exceptional work ethic that even trickles down to his grandkids and his great grandkids. I'm proud to say a lot of my children, my 4 kids, are very proud to work, and they all work hard. Those are the things we were taught, and that's the reason it was so easy to stay around where we lived and grew up because of that. So.
I'm going to ask you little tiny detailed questions just to kind of make sure that I get them in. And this is a nosy question, so you can tell me, never mind. But
Right.
how much did you have in loan debt when you left Texas Lutheran?
When I left Texas Lutheran, the debt that I had for me for guaranteed student loans was $38,000. And then,
How
excuse me,
how long did it take you to pay that off?
I got my first notice that the grace period was over in 1994 or late 1993. And I continued to pay those off until probably 2004. 2004, 2000. I was already married. I've been married 4 years. And of course, my first wife, she had some loan debt also. We also had parent loan that wasn't part of what I took out, but my parents took out that I also took on. So I'm approximately about close to 50,000 altogether, but 38,000 that I got directly from guaranteed student loans, Stafford loans.
So your parents had to take out a loan as well?
Yes, yeah.
And then
Excuse me?
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I remember my dad going. I remember the number stuck in my head. He'd go make quarterly payments there at the business office. They're on Court Street right there at Texas Lutheran, and he'd meet me for lunch. And of course, it was a quarterly payment, about $862 and so many cents that he'd come and he'd bring cash and part of a check, and he'd go home broke. When he'd come from Seguin, he'd go home. He'd give me money, and I'd put some gas, and we'd share a meal. And I'd live on those $10 for a couple of weeks until I was able to go back home. And tremendous sacrifice that they both made, my parents and my youngest brother, who was young at the time. But I remember we worked together in New Braunfels at a place there right off of 35. He'd drive from Lacoste to New Braunfels, and I go work with him on the weekends. He was into management, retail and wholesale on the south side of San Antonio. He got very good at it at a young age. He started in that business in '68, but he was known for setting up stores. So Handy Andy out of San Antonio, before Sam's became Sam's, and there was some chains out of California that were wholesale retail. They were trying to bring this concept into the south side of San Antonio to sell to the businesses, to sell to families that bought commodities, to eat food commodities for their small businesses, restaurants, and their families. So he knew regions. He understood how to market without any schooling. He understood that you don't market or put things at eye level on the south side as you do on the north side. There was different clientele. There was different culture that he got to learn. So several times he was flown to those corporate headquarters in California. San Diego was one city he went to set up stores, and they'd take him for the weekend. He'd work 10, 12 hours and set those stores. What do you mean by set? You just put items exactly where you need for them to be marketed. And he was very successful at that. And before Sam's really took off in San Antonio with their big stores, they called him and asked him, and I don't know what happened, but he didn't have the urge to go into that business the way he was early on. He saw the things that happen in a business like that when it comes to skimming from the top and those types of things that happen in business. And he was very honest, very, very, like I said, very, when I took him, he had diabetes and lost part of his foot in 2000, I believe it was 2003. We took him to try to get disability at the Social Security office. And they told him, they said, well, Mr. Alvarado, I said, you've been working every year and possibly every day that you should have since 1959. He was 14 years old when he started working at a ranch with my grandfather. And all he did was, as a 14-year-old, just clean troughs. It was a feedlot for beef. And they raised steers there, and they would feed those animals and then get them up to weight to sell to market. And he moved up there from the age of 14 till about 19, possibly 20. But he talked about the work he did, and very always, when kids, and he played sports. His dad told him, you can play sports, but you're still gonna have to work. But he would go practice, but then he had to work. He never had weekends off. It didn't matter how sore he was or whatever, he took it bad. I remember the winter times and summer times when you're sore, my dad would still make me go work. And so he learned how to work from a very young age. And you would think that, you know, that he'd spoil us and not make us work, but he was proud for us to see us work. And something that my mother gave us the first week of June off when school was over. She gave you that first week of school off, but after the June 7th, June 8th, if you didn't have a job, she found you one. And we'd go work with the farmers there in Lacoste, Castroville, Lytle, between Lytle and Lacoste. And we did everything from bale hay. Back then it was square bales, and we irrigated, we cleaned milo fields, we did everything. And, you know, before that, he was part of it. Also, he helped on weekends. We're responsible for cleaning the catechism school and the church from the time I was 6 to the time I was probably 17 or 18. That was my mom's job. And so we'd clean the church and the school, and she'd stop drawing those checks probably the second week of June, and we'd let it accumulate so we can get our school clothes in August. That's how we bought our school clothes for school.
Mm.
But he'd go with us and help us, and he'd sit there, and it was relaxing for him, and we just laughed and talked. But very humble man, very hardworking man.
So Steve, when you said that, what did your dad do so his job for a living was to set up these stores? That was his job?
Yeah, he was a grocery manager.
Okay.
Grocery manager, so wholesale retail, and he understood all of the products. He worked with those stores. He was assistant manager when he finished up, and he's very successful at that and working and building those stores. And of course, in those days, you know, $37,000 in the mid '70s was a lot of money as far as an annual salary. He gives on salary, but he says I earned every penny of that. And I remember he'd work sometimes 6 days and 7 days at times as a manager. And but he enjoyed working. He enjoyed working with people. Very patient. He taught us how to work. He taught us how to do things right, work cleanly and work safely, to avoid injuries and do things right the first time. And he was very proud of you know. And it's funny because I was really the only one that was ever able to work with him, because he was not necessarily high strung, but he just had these high expectations, and I took it a different way. I never took it as criticism. I just took it as he trying to make me better. And some kids take it differently, you know. But no, and I wasn't as outspoken as a couple of my other brothers, and you know, it's but he loved us all the same, and we even to the end there, and he would do everything he could around the house, and do physical work that he didn't even do 10 years ago. This was up even to a couple weeks before he passed. Keeping the yard looking nice, and always doing something.
Well, let's go ahead. We'll come back to you, but we're talking about your dad now, so we'll go ahead and start talking about your dad a little bit more. You said that he was patient, that he let you have decide when it was time for you to start going into education, because you got your degree and then you waited a while and you worked at HB Zachary. Why do you feel like it was him being patient with you to figure out when it was time for you to go into your field?
I guess, you know, his father had him at a later age. He had the value of intrinsically, the value of virtue. The virtue of him having the patience that he did was attributed to his faith, knowing that, you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can guide a child a certain way. You can teach them what between right and wrong. You can finally give them everything that they need up until the time that they become a young man to make decisions that can affect the rest of their life. He understood that. He was able to do that. But he, like I said, that was something that I saw him work with people he didn't know, and trying to teach people how to do something the best that they could was almost contagious. That I saw that firsthand in front of me with people that weren't up to par. He wouldn't give up on them right away. He would continue to work with them.
Can you give me an example of that?
Well, I remember one time we were under the gun at the store where we worked in New Braunfels, and the store was getting ready to go under. So the manager who was exiting made a huge purchase of a bunch of a bulk purchase of a very common um, producer of canned vegetables, and it almost killed the store financially. The purchase that was made, and we had to find a way to market it and set it up and set it out. But at the time, my father had just injured his knee coming down the ladder. Well, all of our overhead and all of our excess products were up on top of the frames of the shelving up on top, like many stores do. So we had to do everything by ladder. We'd go up there physically, get up there by hand. Well, he tore a meniscus, or he must have torn his cartilage in his knee, and could barely walk. And the crew that he had, which included me, but I only worked on the weekends because I was going to school in Seguin. I could only go there on Friday nights, sometimes Saturday, mainly Saturday nights. And his crew he kind of pieced it together. But he had a crew that was just very subpar. And there was some young people. It was during Oktoberfest, during Wurstfest in New Braunfels, where there's nothing but a party that's going on. We couldn't find workers to stay because they'd come in intoxicated and they were over, and we struggled getting good workers. So he pieced together a crew of a couple of people and a couple of ladies that we got the job done. But I remember him one time specifically telling people, look, we've got to be able to work with the number of people that we have. We've got to be able to work of 8 men with 5 people. Never said with 3 men and 2 women, or 4 men and a lady. He just said, we've got to be able to get this job done. So an example of that would be, he gave a specific example. If we're moving our hand this fast to get a can to put it up on the shelf, maybe we need to move a little faster like this. So he'd model it. He'd model exactly for these people how to do it. He would teach people how to cut cardboard boxes open to where they wouldn't cut cereal boxes with that blade. He taught me how I could still do things that he taught me in my sleep, because he would model for you a specific way, in a very patient way. And it gave him joy and delight when somebody put effort into learning, and then when he finally saw him do it right. That's where he got his fulfillment from. And it was like that in anything he taught us as young men, whether it was sports, whether it was work, whether it was academics. That's where he got his fulfillment, I think, as a person, helping and serving others.
Do you know if he worked when he was playing baseball when he was younger? Was he part of any of leagues that were? I know that there were a lot of like Mexican American, Latino leagues in South Texas. Was he part of that?
Oh yes, man. He played in several leagues. He played for the Blue Bonnet League. That was the last team he played for was the San Antonio Bobcats. They were out of the Blue Bonnet League, and they played out of Floresville and Southeast San Antonio. He played for the Spanish American League, and he played against several people that are still in the major leagues today as managers, older men that he played against. He played against Cito Gaston. He played against Rick and Mick Mailer that had gone to TMI. They both, I think Rick's the one who made it to the major leagues. He passed already, but Dad played against several players. Then he finally finished. He was 28, and I've got several pictures that I can share. He played in Lilo. He played for a team called the Guzman Scorpions. It's just a local town team, but he got to see a lot of good baseball in the mid '60s. And when the Cardinals won it in '64, he graduated in '64. So he went to a tryout at B.J. Keefe at St. Mary's University, and he said, I couldn't believe how good those players were. He said it was just he was amazed with it, and it was such a delight for him to see all of us play, all of his sons play, and to see the players that we played against. He loved going to Austin. He loved going to Baylor. He loved going to the different places we go. We get to go watch us play. And, for us to have a good game or a great game was great for him to see. It was icing on the cake. He just loved being there and being around it. He stopped playing at 28, at the age of 28, and he told me, he said, I couldn't practice. I was working. I had my oldest brother, and I was just born. He said, I worked, and the only time I could take batting practice was sometime during the week, and most of the time I was, too big to do anything. So I just stopped playing. But he said since we were little, I remember one of the first things he told us, he still believed he could manage a major league baseball team. He understood how to work with players, and not like these days, it's all statistics. He understood, and he knew through gut feelings on how a person could produce if you gave him the opportunity. And he knew how to put people, including us growing up. Somehow he knew what was inside us and what we were capable of. And that was the thing that I saw him when he worked with his colleagues as a manager and as a leader. I mean, he worked harder than anybody that he led, and that I can say without a doubt. He worked harder than anybody that ever worked for him, and that's something that we learned from him. So.
Sounds like he was your hero.
Oh man, he's really. Yeah, I've got to get ready to write a eulogy for my oldest brother. I told him, I said, I'll be there if you can't finish it, but it just doesn't. There's so much that he taught us, so much that is valuable to us that we learned that it never ends. Even now that he's gone since April. It's like he's still there, and he's still giving to us and guiding us and helping us make difficult decisions in leadership positions, seeing the shortcomings of people as blessings for you to be a better leader. That's what he taught us.
What position did he play?
He played in high school. He was a really good football player. He was a running back, and in baseball, he played center field. And I've got a couple of stories that he's told me that I've heard from people, because he in '67, he got a draft card and he went to the physical for Vietnam, and he went to Fort Sam and he failed the physical because of his eyesight. But when he was a center fielder his senior year at Medina Valley, they hit a fly ball and it was a night game and he lost it in the lights, but he had such good instinct to where he knew more or less where the ball was going to hit. And he made a catch at night with terrible eyesight that he did have, just by seeing the ball come off the bat with the instincts to play. So I heard that from other people, and he said, I don't know how I caught that, but I had my glove up, knowing where I thought it was going to land, and it landed. And I felt it, and I made the play. But he played center field in high school. As he got older, because he was 5'11", so in his prime, he probably weighed about he got up to 240. When he played, I think he probably played at 5'11", probably about 200 pounds. He ended up playing third base and first base. You know, as Hispanic, that's pretty tall for a Hispanic, but he was a left-handed hitter, and he played third and first base once he got out of high school, as he got older. And a lot of stories that I've heard, different fields that I got to play on. And we played I played at the Colt 45 League there on the Potita Highway going south, and I blocked home plate one year, and this guy came up and busted a hole in my lip. My dad says, I've got the same type of wound on a play, on a bounce that a catcher threw when I was at third. He got hit by a ball and just made a big old similar hole that he had on the inside of my lip. And he was like, it looks exactly. He said, I said, well, did you make the play? He said, no. I said, I lost the ball, but I thought I lost all my teeth. And but it was just those things that we shared. I mean, he was just he loved playing. He loved playing more than anything. One thing that I'll have to say sometime is that when he in the spring, early spring, when high school baseball had tournaments for Medina Valley, and even now when I would play, and the spring is kind of choppy with the weather, and you don't know if it's going to rain or he'd go out. The first thing I did was go outside and look at the sky. Look at the sky. I knew if those clouds were going to burn off, and if whether or not we were going to be able to play that day. That's what all he wanted to do. And he was like a kid that is just going out there hoping that the clouds would burn off so we could play. He loved playing in the daytime, like me. He said you can see the ball so much better. And I mentioned that in the eulogy for the funeral home that they let me post. I mentioned that he loved, I guess because of his eyesight, but he loved playing. He loved playing center field, but I guess as he got older, he couldn't run as much, but he could hit, and he played third and first to finish out his career.
So as somebody who doesn't know very much about baseball, I like watching the World Series and that's about it. So is that the reason that you would go from playing center field to first and third base is because you don't have to run in center field, you end up having to run a lot and be pretty fast?
You got to be very fast. You got to be very fast. You got to be able to throw. He hurt his arm in playing softball. Somebody came and picked him up to play in a Sunday softball game, and he was tired. He thought he was going to rest that day, and he didn't. He went, and they were rushing, and he didn't warm up very well. He hurt his shoulder really bad, and that's when his career. That's when he's just. He said, "I just couldn't play anymore. I couldn't throw anymore." And that's when he went to first base. First base don't need to throw. You got to be able to make those plays, but first base you can live without having to throw very much during the game.
See, I did not know that. Thank you. And how about third base? What do you have to do there?
You just got to have a very good glove. You got to be able to have a very, really strong arm to make plays. Those two positions, the catching position. I'm only 5'8". I've told him many times if I was his height, I'd still be playing somewhere in Mexico for bottles of tequila for free. If I'd play for free, and he'd laugh. But those positions, right field, those are power hitting positions where those are good hitters, and you can sacrifice some of the defense, some of the things you need to be doing on the field if you can be a good hitter. So if you're a good hitter, you can have a spot in the lineup. That's where teams struggle in the World Series or playoffs because you've got players that can hit good against certain pitchers that they're going to face, but they got so many more players to pick from. But he understood that the baseball system very well. He was a Cleveland Indian fan since he was little, and they won the World Series in 1948. He was 4 years old, and he hoped that they get another one. They got close, and they didn't. I was hoping they get it this last couple of years, and then it just didn't happen. He was patient.
That's What's that? He was patient.
Oh yeah, patient. But there at the end, he saw the difference and changes in the players. Just like children, like kids in school and athletes. I coached for 8 years. He saw the changes in the players. He didn't believe in babying players. He believed that everyone was going to go out and with the same work ethic, with the same humility, feeling blessed that you're able to play a game or have a position or have the opportunity to lead a group of people. That's a blessing. That's how he looked at it. Whatever comes with it, whether it's difficult, whether it's great times or great accomplishments, he believed that everybody should go out and put forth their full effort with all their heart. And that's the person that he was. And at times he'd be frustrated about it, and he would make that known. He'd make it clear because he felt that was his obligation to tell someone if there was something they were doing that wasn't doing something to the full extent of their capacity.
Steve, I'm sure that there must have been times when he watched you play or your brothers and he saw y'all do something not very up to par. How did he handle that?
He gave me subtle, there was a couple times. I was 11 years old. I'd been catching for 2 years. And it seemed like I developed this attitude. I get this attitude about, I get frustrated because the players around me, I felt weren't playing as hard as me. And I'd get an attitude for whatever reason. And when somebody didn't make a play, then I feel like I'd sink down that level and do things. And he'd give me subtle messages. And he'd say something to my mother. He'd get in a conversation with my mother, but to where we could hear. And it happened to me. It happened to all my brothers. If he had something to tell you and he wanted to entice you to get in a conversation with him, he'd have a conversation where we could hear with my mom. So where that was his business, the conversation he was having with him, but he'd tell her exactly how he felt about us. And then, of course, our ears would pin up and we'd get defensive, and then he'd draw us into a conversation. I'll give you an example. I was 11 years old, and I heard that, and I went to the living room, and I was so mad because I felt he was talking about me. He was making fun of me. And he was making fun of the way I throw down second base between innings with no effort. It was basically me being lazy, me getting an attitude. And we got into a conversation. Never happened again. Never happened again. And then again, and then when I was a sophomore at Texas Lutheran, we played Carnival Word. The springs in 92 got so flooded. The springs underneath that area, I guess almost basically all those areas were flooded. And in Carnarvon, the water was coming up out of center field, and it was just flooded constantly. So in Carnarvon had to play all their home games at Trinity. And Trinity was a beautiful field too. I love playing there at Trinity. I probably played there 20 times. He probably went 20 times. And I was the only catcher at Texas Lutheran. We had an injury. And I caught 47 games that year. And it was a conference doubleheader. The umpire was just having a bad day. And I got into it with the umpire, and I got mad and threw my 11-year-old attitude on the field. And something happened to where there was a foul ball or something, and I refused to go get the ball. It wasn't like now in the major leagues, you watch a game now, every time the ball touches the ground, they get a different ball. Well, in college, you use the foul balls, you use the ones that were dirty, you use the ones that maybe had a little tear, you still use them. Well, I got my attitude, and the umpire said, you get that catch, and I'd been catching 2 games the rest of it. So you get it. So this is my 2nd game. And we got into it then. I refused to go get the ball. It's from the backstop. And Dad was right there in the front row. He heard what happened because Trinity, the backstop wasn't as far back as Texas Lutheran or St. Mary's was. It was another 10 feet closer. He heard all the conversation. And finally, he made me go get it. And then the weekend, that was on a Saturday. The next morning, I went home that night and spent the rest of the weekend with him. Yeah, I said, if I was that umpire, I would have made you get all of them that whole game. He just said that. And I got so frustrated. So there was times. He was relentless. He was a little more, how can I say it? He wasn't as vicious as my mom. My mom would tell you stunk. She would outright tell you, oh, you guys stunk. In high school, my senior year, we lose the district championship to Somerset. And it was 3A baseball, so it's a smaller level, but we had been pretty successful. And we played terrible. We couldn't hit. I struck out a couple of times in crucial times. I get home, and I'm sitting on my bottom bunk, and my brother's not home yet. My brother was a junior. Billy was a junior, and we played. We lost like 2-1. Might have been 1-0, and it was just a heartbreaking loss. But we couldn't hit. We just couldn't do anything, and I go and sit there. And I just about lost it. My mom comes and sits in front of me and says, boy, you guys stunk tonight. And she just said, I mean, you talk about just for the jugular. And it's just, but Dad wasn't that vicious. Dad would tell you subtly because he wanted to gauge the level of anger. But, he wasn't one to not be able to go there. But he would have been a true player's manager. He was a true player's player that everybody would have loved him because how hard he played and how hard he worked and how much he loved to play. I love to play, and I still can't stop playing. And I had decided to stop playing last year, but then he passed away. So I decided to go back for another season. And in 16, I had him sign a bat for me. It's a wooden bat league, and I have that bat, and he signed it, and he dated it for me with a Sharpie. I need to save that, and I use that bat. Very seldom did he ever break wooden bats, or I ever broke wooden bats. I broke a wooden bat when I was 14, and I hadn't broken one since. He taught us how to hit. There's a certain way you hold it. There's a certain grain that you point a certain way to swing. He knew all those little subtle things. I'd call him, and I'd let him know how I did, and he'd laugh, and I could hear his joy on the phone. As the years went on, as the sickness started getting to him, he couldn't see games anymore. He loved going to Wolf Stadium to see the Missions play. We'd go. He took us 50 times to go see the San Antonio Dodgers play at BJ Keith. So he loved baseball. He took us. I saw so many. That's why I'm a Dodger fan. We saw so many games at BJ Keith, the AA for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and he saw so much more baseball before that. I mean, the baseball tradition that he was in the late 50s through the mid 60s was probably the best baseball around the San Antonio area in those years.
So there used to be these Mexican-American leagues, right, throughout South Texas.
Yeah.
Why did they have that? Why do they have the Mexican? And it's a sincere question. I really don't know the answer.
Yeah. Well, and you asked me that earlier, but I forgot to mention the Blue Bonnet League. But the big one when he played against the Mailers and Speedo Gaston and those people, that was a Spanish-American league. That was over off of Mission Road, off of Roosevelt Avenue. And the reason they had those leagues is because every little town had a baseball team, every small town. And you could go down Highway 90, and from Castroville, the Highway 90 League was Castroville, Dehanis, Sabinal, Uvalde, Del Rio all had a town team, and they decided to make leagues so they could all play together. Well, Kerrville joined the Highway 90 League, and going south, Spanish American League was nothing but little businesses that sponsored teams and paid for the uniforms and equipment. And that's when they built Spencer Sanchez Field sometime in the late 50s, maybe early 60s, So I got to play there where he played. There was businesses, different restaurants. There was a truck owner that the team was called Huertas Truckers, that was known probably to the late 80s. And he played in those leagues there. So there was Spanish American League and the Pan American League. The Pan American League had a league off of Culebra going towards St. Mary's. But those were all very competitive leagues that they played against. I got to play in one of the last All-Star games between the Pan American and the Spanish American League. But the Spanish American League by far is the best known in San Antonio. I mean, I'm thinking of writing something because there's so many people that are still alive, but they're all dropping off. They're all passing. These are all players that played there. He told me we went to a game one time. I just took him, and he met some players that he played against back in 1966, and that was in like 1996, maybe 99, and he remembered all those men, and of course they're all older, and he just enjoyed it, and he really loved it too.
Was it because they had these were segregated?
No, I don't think.
Were there any non-Latinos in these leagues?
Yeah. There was a couple of teams from the east side. The Windcrest Royals was all black, and they played in those leagues. I even got to play against them, and those were players that played for Sam Houston, for different parts of the east side of San Antonio. Good players that went to the college level, some to the professional level. But no, it was mixed. I don't think it had anything to do with the segregation. I think for the rural towns coming this way where I live, those were country kids that just love to play baseball, and it wasn't beneath them to stop on Sunday and build a baseball field, and that's what they would do. And it was, so we had a couple fields where they played here, but everybody had a town team. But no, all the groups would play with each other. It was Hispanic, it was whites, there was some black that we played against. And then in the leagues when I played, and when Dad finished up, there was more teams from Mexico that would come on the weekends and play. So there was very good competition from there. And the team that I got on at the end that he loved, and the picture that I sent to the funeral home was in one of the first jackets that I've got for him, and he wore it, and he loved all the jackets I gave him, because that team would give us jackets at the end of the season when we win the championship or whatever, and he loved wearing those jackets. He was part of that whole group. But just talking baseball and talking about life, very respectful group that I was lucky enough to get in. They all loved him, and all those players knew him, and their dads played against him, and we all knew each other.
So at what point he developed diabetes? When was that?
He retired in 07. In 07, he had already had it, I think. And I'm sorry, he retired in 03, in 2003. And then he stayed around the house. He was doing good, but he was already feeling the effects of things. And he had 5 bypasses in 2008, and that kind of really affected him, because they saw that's where he began taking medication for diabetes. That's when he got diagnosed with it. But he had already had it. He had already having complications of it, and he took care of himself just through diet. So he didn't have to take his insulin shots or anything like that. But he was on medication for it. In his family, and our family runs the risk for heart disease. So the cholesterol and blood pressure. He always had good blood pressure, but his cholesterol was up there. That was hereditary. But he didn't understand a lot of that. She told him that, Dad, just take the medicine. It's going to help you with the cholesterol levels. And I tried to explain to him the best he could about triglycerides and the Latino diet, how that affects, what we do. But he was very disciplined, even till the last weeks. I mean, when it came down, the doctor told him, you can't eat this, cold turkey. He would not, when he started feeling bad, he stopped drinking beer. He didn't need it. He didn't have the urge. And one day I know he was feeling good. And that's another thing. I was the only one that could ever drink a beer with him. But I don't know if it was because we worked together, because we had so much in common. But he shared so much of his life with me on trips back from New Braunfels, or just sitting on our porch talking about things after work, after a day of work, or after a game when I'd stop by and see him. And we'd talk for hours after that. And so many things that I learned from him in our conversations.
So you said that they had to amputate part of his foot at one point.
Yeah. His big toe got infected on an ingrown toenail. He was still working at the time. He was in a boot. He would not go to the doctor. I told him, Dad, I said, that's going to get gangrene. Sure enough, after about a month, that he wouldn't go get it treated. They went in and they told him, it's got to go. And it was the big toe and part of the front of the foot. Of course, they had to do the therapy and teach him how to walk with it. Get his shoes to where he was fine. And that's when they realized the circulation was so bad in his feet. And that's when they went from there. And then they realized that he started having a congestive heart failure, and he had fluid in his lungs. And that's when they realized that's when he got all these blockages. They tried to do the bypassing the veins from his legs. And that's when they realized that's the reason the gangrene, the ingrown toenail never healed, because it was it was just so many blocked arteries and veins in his legs.
So he was, at this point, he was already retired or no?
Yes.
He was retired.
Yeah, he was already
Okay.
retired.
Okay.
He was already retired.
So tell me about, COVID comes, and how did that affect you all? When did it start to affect your family, and when did he get sick and all that?
I went to go see him on Palm Sunday, on April 5th. And it was a weekend. It was still kind of cool. And he had been struggling with allergies and headaches. But on March 26th, on a Friday, he went to go get a follow-up x-ray on his lungs. And that Friday he came home, and my mother and my youngest brother, Robert, were playing cards, and they ate dinner at the table, and they felt good. And he said, you know what? I don't feel good. I'm going to bed. And went to bed. They ended up playing till about 10, 11 at night. And he woke up the next day, he was really hurting. We knew that with his diabetes, sometimes it affected inflamed his prostate. So we're looking for some medication for him, but he just wasn't feeling good at all. But never really had a fever, never really had a cough. It was just his kidneys, I think, that were being affected. We didn't know as much about it then. We never thought it was COVID. So Sunday, I went to go see him. He was feeling a little better. He got up, but he'd been in bed most of Saturday. So on April 5th, that Sunday, I went and saw him, not knowing that he had COVID. I wasn't wearing a mask. My mom was making masks, because that's when the news was saying, hey, let's make these homemade masks. So she had made a bunch of them just to protect themselves. And I said, oh, that's cool. And we looked, and I sat next to him at the table. We didn't eat together. He didn't feel like eating. So I went after church, and we talked for probably an hour and a half. And then I went home and went to work the next day. I had something I was working on, an investigation that I was doing. And he started going downhill from there. So finally on Monday, they started trying to call his doctor, the office that he went to the previous Friday on the 26th. There was no answer. There was go straight to a voicemail. Finally on Tuesday, somebody left a voice message or a text message on my mother's phone that office had been exposed to someone with COVID on March 23rd and had been closed for business. But my father was fine. He went to get the x-ray because he had pneumonia in January. He had fought through the pneumonia in January. He was in the hospital for about 3 or 4 days, got well, came out. He still had the scarring. He had pneumonia before. But they got a text or a voice message said that office was exposed by an employee or patron that went in that office on March 23rd. That was there the 26th. My mom drove him. He got there. He went in by himself for a 15-minute visit, came back out. My mom asked him, "What did they tell you about your x-rays for your lungs?" He said it was fine. She didn't believe him. She thought maybe they told him something else, but he never disclosed that. And then that office shut down. So April 6th, I went to work. My dad's still feeling bad. April 7th, he says he couldn't breathe anymore. So my mom called EMS. My brother called EMS. They came and got him. They would not allow my mom to go and my brother to go. They took him to the Christus Santa Rosa. From there, immediately, they were going to do more tests. They took him to the one at the medical center. And at that point, it turned out that location was ground zero, what you would call ground zero for COVID-19 in San Antonio. That was on April 8th. April 8th, late in the evening, they called us back and said, yes, we tested him for COVID this morning. He is positive. So, of course, all of my family freaks out. My ex-wife freaks out. She came, got the kids, got really upset with me for me going by myself to expose myself to this. It was a difficult situation. So April 9th, I got tested on a drive-up testing place in the north side of San Antonio, and it was positive. My mother hadn't been tested. I contacted my school and let them know. And my dad was holding his own. He was doing well, but his kidneys were still, he was really struggling with his kidneys staying healthy, and he wasn't eating. He couldn't really talk. He wasn't sedated, but he hadn't been, what's it called?
Intubated?
He hadn't been on the intubator. He hadn't been intubated yet. So he never did. Finally I test positive on the 9th. And of course it's a difficult time because my kids are gone. My mother's by herself. My brothers are freaking out. Me and my mom gets tested on the 9th. No, she didn't get tested to the following Monday after he passed. But me and her were the only ones that had been exposed to when we got it. We were asymptomatic. So that the 9th, we get notice pretty late that he's doing better. And then on Good Friday, we get notice from the nurses because they're calling each one of us. And on the different shifts, they're calling me or my brothers to let them know how he's doing. And then Friday about noon, they said, "Oh, he's doing better." He said he sat up, ate half his sandwich. He's talking. He's feeling pretty good. But we're still watching his kidneys. And then that was the news. So I expected my dad to come home, you know. So I'm there, and then about 7, my youngest brother called me, said that the hospital called that he had to be intubated at 6 p.m. And so we said, okay, what does that mean? We didn't know, but he really took it just a turn for the worse after lunch. And we kept trying to call and get messages, and they didn't. And they said, no, he's not doing very well. They had to intubate him. He must not have been on the intubator an hour and a half. And then he finally passed at 8:15 in the evening. And somehow I told the hospital that I was positive. As soon as I found out he had passed, I went very quickly and abruptly to my mom's to get funeral home paperwork to get that done. And my younger brother, Billy Jose, was going to go. I said, "You can't go." I said, "You haven't been exposed." I said, "I'm positive." I said, "I'll go if they let me go in." Well, my mom couldn't do any of that. My youngest brother was also in quarantine for the health department. We were all in quarantine, ordered quarantine for 14 days. My mom hadn't even been tested yet. It worked out some way where I was able, they allowed me to go into the hospital. They walked me, they escorted me up to the floor where he was at. And it turned out, like I told you, that was ground zero of COVID-19 in San Antonio, because everyone on that floor had COVID-19. And I walked in there with gloves and my mask. And still, it new to me, wearing gloves and a mask, but knew I had to have it on. So I was very safe with it. They said, "You can spend as much time as you want to with him. We'll give you as much time as you want just to be in private with him." So I got to go in and see my dad. He had already passed for about an hour and a half. I got to thank him. I got to see him and turn his body over to the funeral home. I thanked him for the things that he done. I was thankful for everything that he was for us, the years that he spent to provide for us, and the things that he did as a man and as a father and as a husband. But the whole time that I'm in there, these alarms, these code alarms for these people that are going into respiratory failure was like it was like a war zone. It was all around me, and the nurse who was there was a lady from Mexico. Her accent, you could tell she was a national, but she was the head nurse there. And she said, "Look," I said, "I was with your dad when he passed." She told me in Spanish. She said, "I was with him when he passed. We got to pray together. He's fine." And I thanked her, and of course, it was a tough time for me, but there was some kind of solace that was there, even the drive up there. And what got to me was this nurse, and then her manager, the main head nurse. She was a Anglo lady, and there was doctors on the floor talking to people, trying to tell people, "You can't come in here. I'm trying to make you understand that your loved one is in respiratory failure. You're not gonna make." They couldn't make people understand why they couldn't be there with their loved ones when they're all passing, and they were literally every 5 minutes, and those people were rushing back and forth. Well, the nurse, when she told me that, she said she started crying. She said, "We don't get up to come to work to see people die as fast as they're dying right now. We can't keep up. There's nothing we can do for them." And they were just, you could tell they were so tired, and I thanked them for their service, and really a difficult situation. I found out a week later that one of my friends that I grew up in high school, his mom was in one of the rooms a couple doors down. His mother passed away the following morning. And then I had another friend that I think his father, his uncle, that also passed away the following morning on Saturday. But it was just, it was ravaging at the time. I don't think people understood the extent of it, and whatever comes out of the situation or what's published about it, people need to understand that it was a situation of a pandemic that I'm sure people went through back in the day of the influenza pandemic, but those families were able to die together. Those families were able to be physically with their loved ones when they passed. Most of the time, those families were infected. Some survived, some didn't. But the separation that this pandemic has caused and the damage that it did was the fact that we weren't able to have our rituals. We weren't able to have our closure. We weren't able to see our loved ones take their last breath and have those blessings to have that. So that's what's different in this pandemic than any other one. Right of the influenza, my dad used to tell me stories that his father told him when they had just a little strip of land, probably not even 40 yards wide, 30 yards wide, and in the back was a patch of corn and vegetables where they would grow their own vegetables, and they'd see families with similar plots of land where the whole families were wiped out in those times, and all that was left was the homes, and everything was left empty because whole families would die of the flu, and it was a really bad situation in this part of Texas, really all over the nation. There was no antibiotic. Of course, there's no cure since it's a virus. There's no way to alleviate other than try to fight it with a vaccine. But there's no antibiotic that can help.
So your father, you remembered that on these little farms that there would be the strip, and it would just be abandoned because there was nobody there to. They would just abandon it.
The people would pass away, and the houses just stayed alone. And most of those families, including my grandfather, who had that plot of land there, those families came from Mexico, and they cleared all of the farmlands in this part of the state. This part of Medina County, all those areas were nothing but oak, mesquite, cactus. The farmlands that are there now, those were physically cleared by hand by entire families. And you look at the brush, and you look at a migrant, that what they have to walk through to go either from Laredo or from Piedras Negras, and the terrain they've got to walk through. I don't see how people made it. I don't see how people are making it, other than they've got paths that are already established once they are able to cross that border illegally. But back in the day when there was nothing, and and more miles of it. I mean, those paths are, grueling. I can imagine grueling, and without proper footwear, without water. I mean, it was a task for those lands to be cleared that made those farmlands in Medina County and other adjacent counties. That I'm sure of.
So was that your ancestors were part of that group of people that cleared all that land?
There was a lot of families that came, and my paternal great grandfather was a rural in Reynosa. He was a traveling judge. He was a circuit judge that traveled from place to place. So my paternal grandfather was very educated, could write, could read in Spanish. He came over in 1894 to the United States to work. He also got drafted for World War One, and he took a train to Fort Sam. And when he got there, they signed the Treaty of Versailles. The World War One was officially going to be over. They signed the peace treaty, but he walked back from Fort Sam with his, what they call an abrigo, the big trench coat, and some of the equipment that they had given him, because he was getting ready to get on a train to go up to the Northeast to catch a boat. And he was so glad, his family was so glad when they saw him walking home. They're in Pearson, they're in Divine. Between Pearson and Divine, they had another little plot of land there. All those families came, and that was their purpose for coming over. They were offered a small place to live, very much like a sharecropper would in the South when they had that. And they had my dad remembers in 1950, from probably 1948 to 54, my grandfather would take mainly relatives, but families up to Knox City and the Lubbock area, and they would take those families. They had barracks, and they stayed, and they harvested cotton. They picked cotton in those years. And Dad says, I remember missing school here, but I would have school over there. And he remembers I was 6 years old, just went into kindergarten. Saturdays, they would pay the families. So we talk about my grandfather having self-strike match boxes filled with silver dollars and 50-cent pieces to pay the families, pay them their wages. And Dad says, yeah, you pay the families, and they'd all just disperse out to go buy groceries, to go enjoy themselves in Knox City. Knox City was smaller than Pearson, smaller than D'Hanis and Sabinal, a lot smaller town, but it was a cotton town. And Dad remembers telling stories, and me and my oldest brother were just going to drive him there one day to show him those places, that some that were still there, some that were not. We never got a chance to take him. This COVID-19 was very abrupt in what it took from us, and it just, that's another one of the things that it did, the damage, the things that it's caused, But he remembers things like it was yesterday. He told stories about my grandfather buying a Gray Pet soda and two Roy Rogers comic books, and he walked home, and that's what they did. And when my paternal grandmother would go, and then she'd pick out a couple of big old hens, and they'd kill them right then and there by picking up and twisting them, and they'd go home, and they know they made mole that night. My grandmother was known for her fried chicken on 4th of July with Crisco, all the unhealthy stuff, but it was awesome food that she could cook. And she knew on Mother's Day, 4th of July, that was her day, and that's when she did those things. My dad had so many stories of Knox City, of seeing those people work, those migrant families.
So your grandfather was a contractor, a labor contractor.
Not really, but I mean, he might have been, but he was more just kind of like the lead person that was in charge of organizing the families. Not necessarily a contractor. I don't think he got paid for that, from what Dad told me, but he organized the fact that they got paid. And he organized those things, and you got to see those families there safely there and back. Like I said, a lot of them were relatives from sons and brothers that he had.
Do you need to pause for a second?
Yeah, Emily's about to leave, and she's
Okay.
loaded her last laundry basket. It won't take me long.
Yeah, I'm gonna just leave it running, and then we can come back when you get back.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I'm back. I'm back.
Okay, good. Hang on one second. Okay. So how was your mother through all of this, Steve?
She's like she is now. I mean, she's I don't know how a human being could go through the isolation that she went through, the isolation that sometimes she continues, because once we're all cleared of quarantine, then we all continue with our lives, with our jobs and stuff. And she's been there in that home where they live together. They were there since 1967. They got married in 67. They renovated the house a couple of times, and just to start, it was just a little four-room house. But she just, I mean, just the pillar for our family. I mean, in the Latino culture, a lot of times the father's not the one that takes the kids to church every Sunday, or when you do have a father does it, that's a blessing too. My father sometimes worked on Sundays, but my mom was the one who made sure that our faith was formed, that we did things to serve others, and she was she's still, she's 73 now, 74, and she's still active with the church. She still teaches the third grade communion classes, first Holy Communion classes. She's been doing that since she was 15 years old. There on the south side where she grew up. Just faith and able to. I've seen times I spend a week with her, and we had these long conversations about life and about the things that had happened, how things have happened. So she's had a chance to discuss some of those things. But you talk about the things that people go get therapy for and stuff like that. She's never needed that. She's never, and we feel for her because she never had daughters, and she never had the affection until the last 20 years of her sons hugging her the way they're supposed to, and we always have been able to show her that affection that she deserves. But just through this whole thing, she at times she felt that she didn't do enough, and we all feel that way. We all can make ourselves feel that maybe we have done something sooner. We have done something to help him, to avoid what happened to happen. She did everything for him. She did it. There's nothing else she could have ever done. She took care of his parents. She took care of her mother. She's a very self-giving person. She's got nothing to second guess herself about, or to feel like, I just didn't do enough, because she did it all. And I don't think he'd want her feeling as if anything she did was inadequate. And we think of the times that the way things happen. We thought about it for months now, but the way things happen for a reason. Maybe there's always a reason why things happen. You look at it from different standpoints. You can look at it from a spiritual standpoint. You can look at it from just a logistical standpoint. And I just, my family was very spiritual, and things in life happen that are difficult, and you find a way to get through them. But what's been hard is the isolation. Usually, in any situation that's difficult for any family, you've got each other. You've got a means to embrace somebody. You've got a means to hug someone and let them know, to console them. That's never been there for us. And immediately after he passed, she was in quarantine. She could not attend the funeral. I could not approach the people at the funeral because I was exposed. She was ordered by the health department, and as well as my younger brother, Robert, to stay home. She felt really bad about not being able to even go to the cemetery. to me, that was one of the hardest things I had done. I was able to approach, when we lowered the casket, I was able to give him some things that I'd wanted to give him. Not that he needed them, but we were able to approach, and the funeral home did a good job. My oldest brother, Rocky, and my younger brother, Jose Ignacio, we call him Billy, they weren't exposed, so they, in mask and in gloves, they were able to be there while the priest did the ritual, bless the casket. But my mom, that was the hardest part, not feeling like she did enough and not being able to be there, when we buried him. And this whole time leading up to next Saturday, which will finally, I think, would be a means to provide some spiritual closure for her individually, because I know my dad wouldn't have wanted her to carry any of this burden that she's carrying. But it'll provide a means for us to, to not necessarily move on, because we're so close, and the Latino culture is proven in the Dia de los Muertos, and there's things that people do because we believe those people are still with us. Those people are still there with us spiritually. They're just waiting for us at a different place, and I know that's part of Latino culture to do that, and placing of the food and all those things for Dia de los Muertos, beautiful thing. I remember being very young. We'd walk to that Lacoste Cemetery in the dark, and like we were never scared of going in there, because we were in there with my grandmother, and she was there with her brothers and her father, and we're sitting there and we prayed, and there was a lot of laughing and a lot of joking, and a lot of just not anything ever to be afraid of. We had the same upbringing. We were all scared of La Llorona and all that stuff, but we didn't fear, the things that we probably should have a little more, and we just didn't. But that strength came from the upbringing we had, and my mom was a big part of that.
What did you give him? You said you gave him something.
I had received a rosary for my birthday, and on my birthday, Emily, my oldest daughter, she just left. She gave me a rosary with a little case, a little cover. But I just gave him the rosary. It had been blessed already, and I used it on the way to my mom's house the night I found out that he had passed. Really, in private, it's something I'll share, because I think what could be written about this situation spiritually is so much more than what could be written about in just socially and from society, how it's been affected by COVID-19. But I think spiritually, the fact that we're isolated in a certain way, we're unable to provide closure or be there and console each other, that was a big thing for me. But the rosary I had used, that I had just gotten, was very special to me, because my oldest daughter gave it to me, and I placed it on his casket. And as me and my brothers lowered the casket, and we were able to sprinkle the dirt, and I had planned on burying him completely with the shovel and doing the work like I'd done for my grandparents at times. And I was nervous because I was asymptomatic, but I think my stomach and the nerves, me and my mom, the only symptoms we ever felt was just some things with our stomach, but I think it was just nerves from the stress. We never had fever, never had any type of symptom, nothing like that. It just, I guess the nerves. I've never been affected by nerves, but I guess when people say it was just your nerves, that must have been what we were going through. So I gave him that, and they lowered the casket. I was able to give him that. He was very devoted to the rosary every day. On March 8th, same month that he got exposed, my birthday, then he called me and he said, hey, we're going to have something at the house. And every time we got together, him and my brothers, they learned from him, they overdid it for the food. When they cooked, it wasn't just for a couple people, it was for like 50 people. And it's only about 12 of us. And so Dad, like I told you, was very disciplined when it came to his food and his diet and sugars and stuff. Well, that Dad already made a commitment to speak at the Catholic Church here in St. John's, here in Hondo. I'll talk on the rosary, and I've done it before for my mom. She was the president of the Guadalupana Society in Lacoste that I've been part of since I was 6. But I spoke on the rosary, but knowing at the time they wanted me to speak was right in the middle of our dinner, my birthday dinner that Dad was gonna want us to all be there. So I got there late. I didn't get there till about 4. It didn't matter. I mean, we got there. My kids were there. We were all happy. And me and my dad ate. And my dad had eaten a little bit, but he waited for me to get there. So we got to eat, and then we got to eat cake. Of course, it was my birthday. So a couple of people that I've worked with here in Honda, they bought me cakes. We had all kinds of cakes and stuff. And me and Dad ate cake twice. And I'm a big carrot cake person. Well, he ate carrot cake with me and another cake. We just didn't. We sat there and we talked and we laughed, and that's when I took that last picture that the funeral home has in his blue jacket, the Blue Alamo Kings jacket that we talked. Really, he was really happy. He looked young. He looked healthy. We had no idea that we'd be going through just then even 4 weeks later what we went through. You know? And I think he'd be the first to tell you that's just life. That's just life. And sometimes things happen. Even when you think it's rough and it's the worst it could ever be, it always gets better. And he lived with that hope. He was, when you talk about our father being patient and kind, you know, from a spiritual standpoint, he truly was. He was patient, he was kind, he was slow to anger. And well, he taught us the wrath of that anger. He taught us the fear of authority, respect for authority that we had to have in order to be successful. And so I spoke at that gathering, and I went there, and I knew, I don't know, I knew that was, you look at it from a certain standpoint, it's almost like a price I paid for doing that I'd do all over again the same way, but I could have had another few hours with my dad at the time. We were very happy that day, and I think he knows that. He knew that whenever I couldn't be there as much as I wanted, and when I was in my undergrad, I remember calling them, and I remember being so homesick for those simple things, not for, I mean, even if I was home, what would we be doing? It was just a matter of feeling that feeling of being around your parents and the closest that we shared. I mean, not necessarily being at home to do anything, just to be there around them. I mean, even in my career, you know, starting my 26th year in education, the home that they built, something about the water there in Lacoste. We live close to the water system there, and it seemed like that water was the best water in the city. And you could go there on the weekend. Like, I'm about to go later on today to see my mom. She wants me to look at some collages of him that she put together. But to go there for a few hours, say a few prayers, and drink a few glasses of water with ice replenished me. And all my brothers feel the same way. When you go there, you recharge your battery, you resharpen your saw for whatever you got coming up the next week, whether it's challenging or what. You've got that blessing. You've got that replenishment from the grace that was in that home that came from them.
That's a beautiful thought. Can you describe that rosary that you dropped onto his on his casket?
I'm a Dodger fan, and you know, my kids, everything I have is blue. And my dad knew that, my kids knew that. Well, it was a nice blue, dark blue rosary, beautiful rosary that my daughter bought someplace. That I had other things that I could give him. There was other things that you know, I gave him so many different spiritual things and books, and you know, throughout the last few years of his life that we would discuss, we'd talk about, we'd have these discussions on Sunday afternoon sometimes when I'd go there, and we talked about what he heard at church that day. But you know, the rosary was special. He had a special devotion. So it was like a dark blue with the middle, the tri-piece pendant was had Mary and Jesus, baby Jesus on it, but on the back, that little window would have some dirt from Jerusalem. And that was a special rosary that I had. And I only had it for a few weeks, and I gladly gave it to him, and he was blessed. And it seems like now every rosary we do, whether it's with a family or individually, he's with us. He's with us. He's with anyone who, he was the type of person that, even that there was a young man who helped cover the grave that was there working, and something compelled me at the time, and regardless of what we were feeling or what we were going through emotionally, I felt compelled to tell him, this young man who all those workers, whether it was the two funeral home workers or the priest or this young man who bought the machinery to cover up the grave, were taking a risk being around people with COVID. They were making a sacrifice, but knowing that that was their job, that they needed to do their job and be as safe as they could. And I told this young man, because the manner he went about covering up my dad's grave was just the way my dad would have done it. And remind me a lot of my dad as far as, wanting to do the best for somebody. And I told this young man, he was probably in his late 20s, probably had a young family. And I envisioned my dad being a young Hispanic man with young children, trying to do the best job that he did, that I got to see him work. But at a time when he started his job, when he first had his first son and learning a new trade in management, wanting to do his best. That's what I envisioned. So I told this young man, I said, my dad was a very humble and simple man, very hardworking, and he would have appreciated the way you just covered up his grave. I said, know that you and every person that has helped us or reached out to us or tried to touch our family because of whatever reason, know that you and your family are blessed. And that was just the way my dad was. He would do that, and I felt compelled to say that to the young man. And if my dad, Darren Lacoste, that he'll be known, if little towns and families that have that struggle burying their loved ones after somebody dies abruptly. We had a automobile accident that happened probably a year before he passed, and there was 2 kids that were killed. The parents struggled to bury the son. It was really difficult. My dad was very compassionate when it came to that, to helping somebody. He gave some money to the family in a check, and then he was always going to the little Valero there in Lacoste, and they would talk with the men there, and they talk about what's going on in town, and they get some arguments, and then they'd laugh, and then they were gone. But he always bought lottery tickets. And he won $250 one day, and he went and took it to one of the loved ones to give it to the family. On the drop of a hat, he didn't need that. I got to find a way to present in his eulogy that he'd always say, even to the end there, it's always better to have a friend at your side than a dollar in your pocket. He did not discriminate. If he saw somebody needed something, he would drop money like it was nothing. And he didn't care. And we never went hungry. We never went without. We never struggled to where we wondered, hey, are we going to have enough for this? We had to share food sometimes. And I remember cutting tortillas in half. He would cut tortillas in half, and we'd share it. But never to the point of, we don't have enough to get food. We were always very blessed, regardless. And to me, it was hard because I was at a private school, and I knew what it was costing to go there. That's why it was difficult for me to keep going to school, and knew that I had to make it because of the sacrifice they were making.
You said earlier that, well, I should ask you this. Let me wrap this part of it up. Right now, how has COVID changed your life besides your personal loss of your father? You are at a school. I don't know if y'all are having classes online or how that works. And beyond that, I guess you have children. I don't know how the ages of the children are if you have to take care of the children.
Yes, ma'am. I'm taking care of my kids here at home. Emily's 20, Diego's 19, Felicia is 16, and Jesse's my youngest. He's 14. So I tell them, the way it's changed our life is you got to be safe. You got to respect the fact that thing is there, and you can't be lazy when it comes to being clean, washing your hands. Diego and Felicia work at HEB here in Hondo, so they're around people all day. Of course, they've taken some measures to protect them. You've got to respect it. You can't be lazy. When you get home, change your clothes, and set up a station on the back garage for them to take their clothes off when this thing was really hot, and it was the heightened part of people getting exposed here in Hondo. So they know they need to be safe, and that was the thing. We cannot be complacent. that's basically the same thing I took to my campus as a principal. I put some things in place. I discussed some things with my superintendent, what we had to do. And the task is, it's not hard, but the task is convincing everybody that you've got to respect the fact that these things are in place for your safety, and not just for your safety, but for the safety of your loved ones, because you could take and expose your parents, your grandparents, people at home that don't, and we have not, and we're lucky because we've had a couple of incidents of exposure, but it happened before we reopened. We reopened on August 10th, face to face. The majority of our kids wanted to come back, and it was a big fight because the community said, "What are we doing? We're not prepared to do this. You're going to expose all our kids and all our teachers." Very negative fight that we had on our hands. Valley County didn't have the numbers like Bexar County did. Bexar County, there for a while, they were losing 400 people a day at one time. And we reopened with the numbers that we had from the health department in Uvalde County. And we've been blessed with the fact that we haven't had anybody exposed. We haven't had any children exposed. We've got, as of Friday, we had 243 kids on campus, and only 38 are at home doing remote learning. So that changed the fact that I needed to put teachers in the position and people in the position to understand that there was things that we needed to do to remain safe. But from an educational standpoint, to be able to become a different type of teacher that could do things like what we're doing now with the Zoom meeting, by doing instruction in different modes. And we did get some support from TEA. We did get some suggestions on how to do things, on how to call instruction, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous. And my teachers have done so much. Our kids, I've got 6 through 12, so my junior high and high school kids have done such a good job of social distancing, of understanding what I'm there to tell them every day, and they've really been consistent on it. Which changed our life in the fact that, hey, it's just something else that's there. It's another challenge, another obstacle, but we can be safe if we're diligent and put our full focus and attention on it every day.
So do teachers and students have the option of remote learning if they don't feel safe, they can stay home?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. They all chose to come back. A lot of it was with sports. Local decision was made that they could do sports, but they'd have to be face-to-face instruction. That was another argument we had on our hands because we felt, well, you can come to volleyball practice or football practice without a mask and be in contact with your peers. You can come learn face-to-face with a mask. So that was a big argument, but we got through it. It's been very positive. We've been safe. I feel my dad's prayers and the intercession of things, he's protected me and what I've done. And he knew the devotion I had, because the devotion and the attributes I have as far as serving other people were very similar to what he had. And he knew how much it meant to me to protect children and what they're having to go through right now, because it's different than when we were in school. The challenges of society, social media, things going on in different aspects of child abuse, different types of abuse. My ears always to the ground on those things, and I feel like, when you're working with middle school, you're teaching people. When you're teaching the high school, you're teaching curriculum because they've got to graduate. But at those middle school ages, you get a chance to really influence and protect and guide young minds. Like that's what I think once you teach them at that age, they go from there and they go to high school and post-secondary to be very successful if you teach them some characteristics and some traits that'll help them.
So one thing I want to touch on, you said that you felt that you had to go to work at HB Zachary before you went to start teaching and coaching. Why was that? What did you feel like you still needed before you did that, before you went to teaching?
I finished up Texas Lutheran. I've told you how I felt about the fact that I didn't necessarily feel guilty, but I appreciated what my parents went through to put me through school there. It was a great sacrifice. When I found out that I was not able or good enough to go to the next level, Um, it was my hope and dream, and I think it was my dad's hope and dream that I would play at the next level. Um, I wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough. I struggled with that. I struggled with the fact that I wasn't at the level I needed to be to make it a professional career. I struggled with that. I belabored that mindset forever. Like anybody else who would feel rejected and inadequate when it came to doing that. I love playing as much as my dad loved the game. I felt like I let my whole family down, and I took on that burden. Which, in hindsight, it's not a burden that he ever wanted me to bear. It's not a burden that I ever should have carried, but I felt that way, and I almost didn't feel worthy to be in front of children or students in that line of work at the time that I was in that mindset. And that's why I felt he felt what I was feeling, because I talked about it since I was 8. And I dealt with it in that way, and it took me 2.5, 3 years to get to the point of that. And as a young person, you try to figure it out yourself. You've got people that love you and that you should be able to trust in what they tell you. And I did. I took all of the advice that my mom and dad gave me. But that aspect of my life, it was something that I really felt I let them down at the time. And I know that's not something that he ever would have wanted me to feel for a second, think that I let them down. I mean, but at the time I did. And I just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to go. Very much a self-isolation type situation. You know.
So was it just a question of you talking to yourself, or just kind of coming to terms with this is what I'm capable of, and I'm ready to accept that and move on? Is that what it was?
Yeah. What was difficult was more difficult. It's like I told you, I don't know if I ever mentioned, but I was a late bloomer. And I played my best at the level that I played at after I got out of college. I played when I was 24, 25. I thought that I had filled out. I was as good as I'd ever be. And I just didn't have that in undergrad when I played. The time that I was playing, when is the time to be recognized or scouted by different scouting associations, the Major League Scouting Association. But by the time I was 24, 25, I guess the thing that sealed it for me is my father told me, you could have played somewhere, you just needed a break. But 24, 25, they stopped talking to people at that age, unless you're extraordinarily spectacular and you're in a noted league to where your statistics are verified, that type of thing. Spanish American League and these leagues, what they call beer leagues, they're fun Sunday competition. I've seen some great players come through, but for some reason they didn't make it. But every now and then you see these flickers and these sparks of, man, they could have they might have made it. And I've seen players that I said, I don't know how they didn't make it. And it's very much like my brother Rocky, who lived on the west side of San Antonio. He'd go to these YMCAs and the boys club, and he would see this talent there in the basketball courts. And these pickup games of these kids that could never pass an end of court test, but they could play basketball. They just, academically, they would never make it anywhere. But the talent is still there. And my dad told me, you would have gotten a break. I think you got, but it wouldn't have happened until I was 25 or 26. The time I was an undergrad at Texas Lutheran, I wasn't the player that I was when I got out. So it wasn't until after that, right before I got married at 28, when I started to accept the fact that, even though I can play now, or I might have had a shot to even get looked at, I'm too old now, and I'm gonna start a family now.
Very interesting. So let me ask you this. You talk about the Guadalupanas, and I guess I had thought of the Guadalupanas as being more of a women's organization. Tell me about that.
No, Guadalupano, they kind of changed the name in the last couple of years. Guadalupano can be male or female. And it's I was Juan Diego twice in reenactments and the plays when they talk about the celebration, when you reenact the apparitions. I was Juan Diego two occasions. And I remember in Lacoste, it was a big deal. But no, males and females, and it was a big deal because the church in Lacoste was built by those families that were there. And my paternal grandfather, like I said, arrived after 1900. My maternal grandmother was born in 1904 on the other side in Nuevo Laredo, in a little town called Vialdama, there in that little town there, not even an hour from the border. But those families came and they all wanted to build a Catholic church. So in 1911, they built the Catholic church out of Dehennis bricks, the Dehennis brick yard that's here in Dehennis. So many schools and things and buildings in Medina County come from that. And you see the Dehennis sign on them. And I remember seeing some of the bricks there in the front of the Lacoste Church, 1911. So my paternal grandfather helped build, build that church, Our Lady of Grace. So the men were always a big part of the church there. And I met so many people, men and women who were part of it. So no, it's a devotion to that. And like I said, I was pretty much wrangled as Juan Diego those years, and my mom was like, "Man, I don't want to wear this." And you have to wear the tilma, and then it was cold, and we didn't have the church hall like we did before, so we had it in an outdoor pavilion. They would drop the walls down that were just hanging by hooks, and it was just pieces of plywood. But it was cold in there, and the old people, I learned right away that the older people, whenever you're standing in line, because afterwards they had a tamale meal and they had the cinnamon hot chocolate that the older ladies would make. And we just ate really good food. Well, the people that see you in line, when you're still in your outfit, they come give you money. I remember getting quarters and dollars and stuff, because I was Juan Diego that year, But a very humble devotion to that, and both men and women there in Lacoste, I saw that.
So Steve, some of the people who are going to be watching this do not know the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Can you just give like a brief overview of what that is so they'll understand the tilma and the Juan Diego thing?
Man, that's a great story, but those are apparitions that were approved by the Vatican as a miracle because of the way things transpired. The talk I gave last year on my birthday was actually the historical and scientific findings on the tilma of Juan Diego. But those are approved apparitions by the Vatican in Rome, that those are miraculous apparitions, and the messages and the things that happen, those are all historically accurate. When Cortez landed in Veracruz in 1518, those missionaries coming from Spain, of course, the Spaniards were coming for gold, God, and glory. There was a group of missionaries that came to convert the tribes that were there, the Aztecs, the Mayas, and the Incas that were in the Central American region. When they landed in Veracruz, the missionaries, there was a couple of them, and I've got them stated, I forget some of the names, but their commitment was so strong, they burned the Spanish fleet in the harbor to keep anyone from trying to return. When those Spaniards landed, of course, they had the military, they had the horses, they had the gunpowder. So there was different reasons why different Spaniards were there. But the ones who went there to convert the paganistic gods of the Aztecs were there for a reason. They began to liberate little towns. And one of the first villages that they liberated was where Juan Diego was born. He had a different name. That was all a different language. That was all a different culture. The transition to where they finally saw and they found a place to build Mexico City was all a political and military type move, but with conversion to the Catholic Church in mind by the Spanish explorers. Well, I have to give you that information before you go, because Juan Diego was young when he was confirmed a Catholic for the first time. He was given the name Juan Diego as his Catholic name, as his patron saint in the conversion. At the time, Montezuma, and I've got it in my research and I can't remember the exact number, but Montezuma, the emperor of the Aztecs, was human sacrificing. I want to say at one time it was reaching up to 18,000 people a day. and I don't have the statistics right, but the statistics are there on what was recorded by the Spaniards who went there. That they put him in house arrest, Montezuma, in order to try to take over this paganistic society that had running water, that had architecture, that had a very complex civilization that they had built. They understood math. They understood the concept of zero. The Incas were great mathematicians as well. They had a full-blown society, but the human sacrifice and the paganistic ways were what the Spanish were trying to reconvert, and all that happened at the same time. The number of people being sacrificed, the number of lives being lost, I think led to the apparitions. If you look at Medjugorje, you look at, that's in Russia, where these apparitions continue to happen since the 1980s. It seems like these apparitions happen in places where conversion needs to happen, or where there's powers abusing the citizens that are there, or there's some type of very serious oppression to where God sends a means to that. And that's just my spiritual belief. These apparitions happened starting on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception on December 8th, when Juan Diego was walking. He was a widow. His wife, he was in his late 40s, and his wife had passed away the year before, and he was still in mourning. But he was walking. He'd go to church every day. He was walking. He had an uncle named Juan Bernardino, who was sick and on his deathbed. And the first apparition on December 8th was the Feast of the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary. All that's tied to other apparitions that have happened also. So those are all connected. I've got that in my research. But that first apparition, she spoke to him. She told him what she needed from him, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He was almost in awe of what had happened, but he knew what he had to do. He knew he had a sick uncle. She told him to take a message to the bishop, to let the bishop there know that she wanted a temple built in her honor for the conversion of souls there in that region. So he went and told the bishop. Of course, the bishop thinks he's crazy. He's a peasant. He's dressed as a campesino, a very poor citizen of that region at the time. And they pretty much told him, "Are you crazy? Go away." And he came back multiple times up until the last time he was told to bring proof. Now, and so the apparitions happen. She continues to tell him what she needs for him to do, and he keeps trying to tell her, "Look, I've got these things going on. They won't believe me what you're seeing. I understand that you're beautiful. I understand that you are the mother of God." And he believed that, but he was never any way that he could, as a human, as a poor peasant, convince the bishop, who's kind of like royalty there in authority, that she had appeared to him. In the last one, they asked for proof. And in that part of the region of Mexico where they were at, there was no way geographically that these Castilian roses that were only known to be in Spain could grow, especially in December, especially for them to sprout in December. So he bought these roses to that, and he wrapped them in the tilma. And when he dropped them, there was an imprint, an image of the Virgin Mary, which is the image of the Virgen de Guadalupe. And they were in awe, and they built a temple on that. And I've studied the tilma, what's there scientifically about the tilma. Of course, it's all work that's been written by scientists. And there's always going to be devil's advocates on, oh, it could be this and that. But on that image that has been there since 1531 in that temple, somebody attempted to destroy it. Somebody poured acid on it, and there's a mark on the image of some type of acid that was thrown on it when somebody was trying to clean it. Somebody exploded a bomb on the altar at that temple, and the image was never damaged. But there's images of crucifixes, of gold crucifixes and brass candle holders that are bent from the explosion, but the image was never harmed. Well, anyway, that image was on the tilma. They believe Juan Diego, his uncle ended up dying after that, but everything was settled to where the apparitions were real and approved by the Vatican. Not then, but I don't even know how long after that. But the tilma, the image on the tilma and the pigment on the actual coloring, there's nothing in those regions, in the region, whether it's an animal, whether it's a plant, or what you make any type of ink out of, there's nothing in that region that could explain where somebody, an artist, could have done that. They've done x-rays of that tilma that shows that it couldn't have been done by an artist because there's no skeleton pencil drawing for them to paint it. And there's other things. There's other things on the eyes. There's a reflection on the eyes when they put it under a microscope and they enhance it. There's some reflections of things that are there that I'm still studying that are really neat. And I learned this past summer that there was that image with her, the Virgin Mary, with standing on top of the crescent moon, with the stars that were on that mantle that she's wearing. People think it's actually green, but it's actually almost like a teal color, almost like the color of a. I've been to Tulum, the Mayan ruins in Tulum, and everywhere you walk around, there's iguanas. Some of those iguanas have that teal, almost bluish green looking color. That's what that is. That color is on that tilma, on the shawl, the mantle that she's wearing. It just looks green in photographs that they take. But the pink, and shows that she's with child. There's significance for all of that. But the stars on her mantle are exactly the constellation that was marked on that day on December 12th, 1531. The alignment of the constellations, the way they're fixed on the mantle. So there's different things with that.
That's
so
really,
yeah. Go ahead.
So it's really fascinating because everywhere you go where there's any Mexican American people, you see the Virgen de Guadalupe every place. So it's
and I thought that was originated in Mexico. I'm researching now something that there was something similar when we just celebrated the Feast of the Holy Rosary, October 7th. If you look at those, that was before 1531, and those battleships that were being used by Spain. The reason that became the Feast of the Holy Rosary because the Pope who was there at the time, I can't remember the name. I've got it all in my notes. But if you look at some of the pictures that were painted of that day, and the reason the Spanish fleet won that was because they all stopped and prayed the Rosary before that battle. But some of the flags that are fixated on those battleships and on the front part of those battleships was the image of the Virgen de Guadalupe. There was another apparition that happened in Spain, Portugal, that was very similar to that. And it's very similar. People think that it happened after 1531, but it wasn't. It was before that. It was right around Columbus when that happened. So timeline is really neat, but it's not. I learned that Juan Diego's family was prominent there, but they were poor peasants that were converted, just like all the other Aztecs there.
Thank you very much, because I think it's really very cool. We're interviewing people for this project that are of lots of different ethnicities, and I'm not sure that they know about the Virgen de Guadalupe, so I appreciate that. So do you think you started off as a teacher and a coach, and then you switched over to administration? Do you think that your interest in that sort of position was influenced by your father because he was kind of a manager type himself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost like if you strain something, if you take different grains of sand and you strain them or you put them through a colander, most of the smaller ones are going to go through. There are going to be some that are left. You do a screen strainer, when you're trying to go through soil. Sometimes you just end up in those positions. Most of the time, in his case and in my case, is because the work ethic that we try to go to work with every day was, like I told you, he literally worked harder than anybody that worked for him. And I was the same way in everything that I did. And before you know it, you're having to do, not having to do, but you're able to do the things at the next level to lead. And to me, the greatest thing that he taught me was learn things from the ground up. and I learned every job that I've had, I've learned it from the ground level up. I was never an instructional aide. I was just a teacher and a coach, but then I moved up into levels of administration. When I was surveying, I started as a rodman. You know, I love swinging a sledgehammer. I wish I could swing a sledgehammer all day, but once I got to the point of learning that trade, then I moved up to instrument man, and you get to move up to field engineer because you know the job and because what you bring to work every day. It's inevitable if you continue to work. It's inevitable that you're going to get a leadership position if you're devoted to your job and you put that effort forth every day. So, yeah, I think in a way it was. I took a lot of pride in that. I took pride like he did, and maybe he never realized that he taught me that I always enjoyed looking back on things and saying, we did this that nobody else could do or nobody wanted to do. We did it good. And I took pride in that, and I learned that from him. Some situations that we worked on together and things that we never thought we'd finish or do physically, and you got it done. He taught me. I remember working one time in college. I'd come home in the summer when I was still in school, and I'd clean white and yellow corn for the tortilla factory, but out of one of the grain companies there in La Costa, a block from my house. And I'd come home with blisters on my hands and on the inside heels of my wrists, blisters just from the friction of picking up sacks and stacking them. And he'd tell me, and I said, Daddy, I said, how you feeling? I said, I'm sore. And I show him my hands. He said, I bet you in about a week you know that's there. Your body adjusts to anything that you put it through. But the thing is, you got to rest it, and every day you're gonna get stronger and stronger. And I learned that from him. I mean, the hard stuff, it seems like it's hard, and people don't like to do it because they think that the pain that you have of doing something hard. And I've learned that whether it's physical, whether it's mental, or it's spiritual, he taught me the fact that no matter what level of the degree of how difficult something is, it's always going to get easier as you continue to experience it. That pain is temporary, and that touches a chord with my brothers and I. We're very athletic minded, and yeah, I mean it hurts for a while, but then it goes away, and you get better if you want to.
Very good, Steve. This has been so delightful. Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you'd like to talk about?
It just there's just so much. I mean, there's so much that I can write about, and there's so many things that I experienced so many things that I thought. And as you know, you talked to me for a while now, and you understand that I love researching things to find out not so much the truth, but to get a better understanding of my faith, the things that happen and that we go through in life. And one thing that I can't say enough about is the fact that you know, of difficult things, fruits come from very difficult things. And I've learned, and I model for my teachers who right now are going through this COVID-19 transition. They came in full of anxiety, full of fear of not being adequate, not having purpose, because they weren't tech-minded to do the things we're doing now and be able to deliver instruction to a kid who's watching at home because of safety reasons. I've learned that just every challenge, every obstacle, everything that you go through, if it's worth accomplishing, is going to be difficult. And when you learn that those things are a means to grow, a means to get stronger, a means to get better, that they're actually a blessing, that's what I got from my dad. That's what I learned from his situation. The hardest thing is not knowing what it was like for him to be by himself his last moments. To me, this whole thing, and I've come to grips with the fact that maybe he didn't want us to experience that. Maybe he didn't want us to see that. Maybe he didn't want us to go through that pain. We were there when both his parents. Well, I was a baby when his dad died, but he was there. People die in your arms, and people breathe and pray to their last moment with you. And maybe it worked out that way for a reason. He was a private person, but he was very humble. But that's the only thing that I don't think he wants me to wonder about. But that's the only thing that I contemplate a lot is the fact that we weren't there with him at his last moment. That's what this thing does. I listened to this radio show that Bruce Springsteen has. And it was in the summer. It was called Songs from My Home, because he was in quarantine also, and he couldn't. Of course, the whole nation shut down because of COVID. And they were arguing the political things that were going on, because people were talking about not wearing masks, and people were denying how serious this was. When Dad died, 38,000 people had died of COVID. And I saw a week and a half ago, 200,000 have died of COVID. On April 10th, when he died, he was in that when they announced 38,000 Americans, just Americans, have died. And then I look in the United States now, and I'm sure it's more now, but the numbers are slowing down. 200,000 people. Nothing like the flu epidemic, but it just seems like too much. And you know, he was getting angry with the political system, with the fact that there was no cure for it, that it was coming. He was very, very aware of what was going on politically with all that, and he had his views, but it's just a shame that it hit us this hard. You know?
Do you think that, how do you feel about that? Here we are in a health crisis, and it is a politicized issue.
I guess it's like when I was at Texas Lutheran, I studied the institution of slavery. I studied a lot of good history there. I studied Americo Paredes, the books that he wrote on the Battle of Gregorio Cortes, and how Latinos in Texas, how the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo had people end up, the Latino culture, Mexican American people's families ended up with plots of land. However that was done, I saw the unfairness, the inequity in it, the way it was handled. But for it to be spoken of politically, when I did my senior seminar at Texas Lutheran, I did my seminar on the institution of slavery. My argument was that it would depend on the group that was enslaved on the results that happened. I felt that as a proud Mexican-American 19, 20-year-old man, that if I was put in that situation and I knew that my family, my children after me would be born into slavery, that some people would rather die than live in those conditions. And what I learned really abruptly, because I read chronicles, and I read notes taken by runaway slaves, by slaves that escaped, by slaves that were flogged, by slaves that lost their family, by slaves that were able to gain the English language after they were separated in Africa, coming over here. And I realized that it didn't matter what group it was. It was the institution. It was the evil in the psychological means to control a group to get that. And back to the answer your question, this aspect that I think to control a group, to get these political, to get this resource of human labor from these people, that they were all nothing but numbers. They were just a number, and they clothed them from the Levi's, the denim jeans they make them wear, the barracks they slept in, to the fact that they wouldn't let them read or learn anything academically. They were just a number. I hate the fact that this situation and this way that people are politically talking about this situation, this pandemic, it angers me to think that when you say the number 200,000 people that have died, just a number. That angers me, because these are people. Bruce Springsteen said it best. He'd start his show or a song that he was going to play. He'd introduce it by, "This is such and such, housewife, really good person. They love to do this on Sundays." He described this human being who was a victim of COVID-19. Then he'd play a song in dedication of the memory of these people. These are people that have died, people that, that unfortunately they surmised from this pandemic. They suffered the ultimate from what we're going through. But I hate the fact that were numbers, that were just numbers, were statistics that, and I think there's good people out there trying to get a vaccine going. I think I hate to hear the fact that, maybe there's something ready, but there's something that's always going to hinder a situation. I understand that the communist ways in China. I've studied how they try to control different populations at different times in the past couple of centuries, and not just in China, but in other Eastern countries. So you wonder. You wonder who really has the authority, or who really has the authority on keeping us well and safe. So I question that, but it's difficult for me when my father gave as much as he did to this country and gladly paid taxes and gladly did whatever he needed to. He loved paying it. He never missed a bill. He would write his bills down. He'd write his checks by hand, even at the end when he couldn't see. But it hurt me when we took him to the Social Security office when he lost his toe and part of his foot. And they said, Mr. Alvarado, you looks like you worked here every year that you're supposed to, probably every day. You were supposed to since 1959. We can't help you because this is considered a pre-existing condition. They didn't help him with disability. And he didn't get what he deserved there after working since 1959. So those are the things politically that still kind of sting what we've gone through.
Steve, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful interview for us, and we really appreciate you taking all this time. I'm going to stop recording because I want to ask you a couple of questions off.